All right. Welcome, Michael Fixler from Cornell Cooperative Extension.
Thank you. And, as Lori said, I'm actually from the Master Gardener program that's part of Cornell Cooperative Extension. We're located on Collimer Road, and a good portion of the counties in New York State have a Cornell Cooperative Extension program. The Master Gardener program is actually a national program, always connected with the land grant university in a given state. So Cornell Agriculture being the land grant program in New York, that's who we're connected with. I've had a few questions about the Master Gardener program. I can tell you that the program normally takes new students in January, and it is varied over the years. It's right now it's a 2-year course that you take, and you have a project at one point. If you become a Master Gardener, you have to do a certain number of volunteer hours to become a Master Gardener, and then you have to continue to do a certain number of volunteer hours each year to stay in the program. And it's fun. You do get to meet and be involved with other gardeners, which is the learning. I think as much comes from that as it does from the actual course work that we did or do. So that's the story on that. And one of the other things we do is do these presentations like this, and there's a large number of presentations the Master Gardener program does for groups, and we offer that. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about, let's see if I can make this work. Let's try this.
There's a little arrow on the bottom there.
Let's try that and see if that
Your pointers.
You got it. Yeah. Okay. So thank you. I don't know why this thing is not working now, but we won't worry about it. Yeah. So this is some of the stuff that they ask us to put into our presentation, just to remind you that Cornell Cooperative Extension supports equal educational and employment opportunities. And this tells you a little bit about, as I mentioned, about the Cornell Cooperative Extension group, and also the Master Gardener program. And you can see that there's a lot of different things that we do and we're involved with. Some people specialize in different things more than others. It's very much of an ecological way of approaching gardening, for sure, trying to fit in with the environment. Yes?
I'm curious, it says Onondaga County. I thought Cornell was in a different county. Okay,
yeah, good question, and that reminds me, if you have comments or questions, just raise your hand and we'll deal with it when they come. I don't need to all come at the end or anything like that. Cornell, of course, is in Ithaca, I'm trying to remember what Cornell is. Tompkins County, right? Thank you. But all over the state, because of being the land grant college, we have Cornell Cooperative Extension chapters and Master Gardener programs throughout the state that are connected with Cornell, because of it being the land grant program. It's been I found it very interesting to get together with other Master Gardeners in Rockland County or in Erie County. I mean, it is literally all over. Not every county does have a Master Gardener program. I'm not sure if everyone does have a Cornell Cooperative Extension. So, and this presentation is, as you know, gardening in a time of climate change. I actually developed this with another Master Gardener who couldn't make it today because she actually works at Syracuse University, Tess Schaffler. So just to fill you in on that. And welcome to all of you. As I said, if you have any comments or questions, please feel free to pipe in at any time. What I'm going to do is do a number of things. I'm going to start out with just giving a little background on climate change. It seems like we hardly need any of that, but just so that we're kind of on the same page as far as what's going on with that. And then talk a little bit about what we can do that has, for as gardeners, that has to do with climate change. So the first basis that we need to talk about, and again, this is something that we practically shouldn't even have to, but just to remind everybody of, because you do get comments from especially people in the press or politicians or something like that. There's a big difference between weather and climate. And we're not really talking about weather. It's funny because, I mean, today is like one of the hottest October, what is today, the 25th? Yeah, one of the hottest October 25th on record. And we can say, well, it's pretty warm. But on the other hand, when I pick up the newspaper and I turn to the weather section, it says the average temperature for this day would normally be in the 60s. And this is one of, if not the hottest October 25th that we have. And we've had that for a while. And that probably does have something to do with things that are happening with the climate. The climate is much more of the long-term weather conditions. So they do that where they look at the average temperatures, the average amount of rainfall. And these are the things that really affect us as gardeners. Anybody notice any of the changes, or what have you noticed as far as climate changes, I guess?
Definitely a lot less snow than when I was younger.
Yeah, the last 2 years, and that's one of the things they calculate. We haven't been doing too well in this the golden snowball for the last 2 years. I don't know if that's good or bad. Other people, what have you noticed in terms of climate?
More extremes.
Yeah.
The cold is colder. It doesn't
Yeah.
last as long, but it's also much hotter.
Right. And I always don't care for the term global warming because it doesn't really describe it. And that some people even say you should be calling it global weirding because the extremes, the things that didn't used to happen, you never know when, but it does. But that is based on what's actually happened with the science. So we'll talk a little bit about the science.
Summers seem to be hotter.
Yeah, and they are. There's no, but when they actually calculate it and you look at.
I'm not originally from here, but I went to school in Rochester.
I
don't remember there being 90-degree days very often.
Right.
30 years ago.
Yeah. And they've
Now
actually
it's come.
they can add it up and figure that out. So what causes this climate change if we're noticing that it is going on? Just to kind of give a basis for this, you have the radiation that's absorbed by the Earth's surface and warming it, and then solar radiation is reflected by the Earth and atmosphere, and so you get all of that radiation, all of that coming in. And what's actually happening as it passes through the atmosphere, normally in past years, many years ago, it would dissipate. And it's not, one of the things that I read was that calling it a greenhouse effect is not exactly accurate, because if you look at a greenhouse, there's actually glass over the house that prevents a lot of it from the heat from leaving. But the reality of it is that the atmosphere, because of the amount of the gases, the carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrogen oxide are actually trapping a certain percentage of it. So it's acting like a piece of glass over the entire Earth. And that's the problem. And I mentioned those three gases. We hear a lot about carbon dioxide. We also know about methane, and they're different in certain ways. Methane actually is more powerful, but it dissipates more. It's the carbon dioxide that is the most dangerous because it sits around for such a long time. And this just gives you an idea also of some of the different ways that carbon dioxide is produced. As we all know, the transportation, electricity, I mean, these are the big ones that cause it. Sir?
How come you have nothing up there about volcanoes, which put more of this stuff in the air in one eruption than we can do in 100 years?
My understanding is that the volcanoes, I believe, create the methane gas, if I'm not mistaken. And if that was the case, that it was the volcanoes that were causing climate change,
Which they are.
then over the centuries, the volcanoes would be, when you think about it, there aren't more volcanoes now than there were 30 years ago, right?
There's probably
on the Earth.
more erupting now.
Yeah, I don't know, but I think what the scientists have
In
determined.
Hawaii, you got 30 in Iceland.
Right, definitely.
I think this slide is really just showing all the human source.
Yeah, this is what we're saying, is that there's no question that humanity has.
There's a baseline source of all these.
Exactly.
But this is all the human.
And they can actually compare what's gone happen. Yeah.
From what I understand, the oil industry has done a lot more damage than just about everything else. And I see it there under natural gas, petroleum systems. And to me, that statistic's got to be way off the map.
Yeah. Well, remember, that transportation, whoops, that's that. So the transportation is, when you think about it, most vehicles, almost all vehicles are powered by the burning of fossil fuels, and for that matter, a lot of electricity all over the world is created by the burning of fossil
But
fuels,
you
and
know
that's the one thing that's gone up a lot.
I have to say though, I get cranky about these things. That's maybe the wrong thing to say. But the petroleum industry has done a tremendous amount of damage with misinformation.
Yeah.
They had a whole campaign about having us recycle because recycle was going to save the planet. And that was just really a campaign that they paid, their money for, so that it would deflect away from their aggressive determination to not lose money.
Sure.
And so to me, it should be, one of those circles should be petroleum industry because
But I don't want to confuse people with those three circles. These three are the leading examples of gases that are put into the atmosphere, and some of them we definitely know are caused by natural things that we do, like the fermentation. I think that's the cows that cause that, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. But anyway, let's not talk as much about that because I want to get on to what we can do as gardeners for each of these. So let's the argument over what is the worst and what is probably for another day, or at least for another part of this talk. So this one here shows that the actual greenhouse gas emissions in 2014 from the EPA, and that 81%, because as I said, the carbon dioxide is the thing that hangs around, and the methane actually, even though it's much worse when it first goes out there, it disappears. And now we're moving into the whole gardening issue. And a lot of you know, as gardeners, there are plant hardiness zones that have been created based on the temperatures, the lowest temperatures, and that can be handled by individual plants. And this 1990 map shows you It's in certain parts of the country, it's worse than others, or it's changed more than others. So you can see that number 3 has like almost disappeared in 2020. In 2012, and if you look at Florida, it hasn't really changed that much. Well, there's this part here has more of a zone 6 than it did then. Zone 8, I guess, actually. But there's just been gradual changes. Even and New York State, you can really see that zone 4, which used to dip in over here, now it's hardly any zone 4. It's much more zone 5. So that's an example. You wouldn't expect that this would have that they would have had to have changed the plant hardiness zones that much in 20 years, 22 years. Sir,
How often do they update these maps?
how often do
How
they?
often does the USDA update?
I don't know how often I think they've realized they had to do it because of the reports. My own guess was that they probably didn't do it for many, many years.
Is 2012 what we operate from today?
Well, that was the closest one that I was able to get, but I think, I'm not sure if they've updated it since then. This was a lot more recent, as you can see, 2018, and this shows you the average lowest annual temperature and it's specific to this the Syracuse area, and you can see right there that it does fluctuate. So it went down a little bit and went up, went down a little bit, but since 1989, and that's really what we're talking about so much, it's gone up, 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 up. Yeah, every year it's going to change a little bit. We know we have colder winters sometimes and warmer winters, but it's almost scary to see how much it's gone up over that 29-year period, and that's the average lowest annual temperature. So it's statistically what they have measured and told us.
I saw an interesting TV show a few weeks ago that unless there are changes, human changes, that the French wine industry in 40 or 50 years maybe moved up to the British Isles.
I've been hearing a lot about that with, especially these agricultural commodities that are in a very small area. I was going to mention one of the books that I really like, partly because it's a little bit more hopeful, and she gives examples. She actually comes from California and grew up in an area from where the California wine industry is big, and it's been very upsetting to her to go back home and see. She actually teaches in Sweden herself, Kimberly Nicholas, but she has a lot of ideas and examples of things that we can do. And as a scientist, she's just seen it happen in so many ways. So, and here's another example of what's happened with climate change, as we certainly know and we've talked about. It's actually been wetter in the Northeast than in normal years, but it's so much drier in the Southwest. I mean, when you look at what they've got there in the Southwest, I mean, that's where all the fires are happening. I always say that I can pull up a newspaper on almost any time that I'm doing this presentation, and there's an example of something that's happening that has practically never happened before, certainly not to the extent that it has. And that the wildfires have just been terrible out there. But we have a real problem with the flooding. So what can we do about this? One of the big things that we like to mention is everybody's going to have to do what feels right to them. I'm a retired elementary school teacher, and there were a few years when we got these books that said simple things you can do to save the earth. The philosophy of these books, and my philosophy, is you have to do what's right for you. You have to do whatever you want. In no way would we want to be making other people feel guilty about it. I'm going to talk a little bit about two different kinds of things that you can do very soon. But the big thing is you do what works for you, what makes sense to you, and don't think that you can do everything or would want to do everything. She talks a lot about flying, getting on airplanes and flying less, which there's no question that air travel is a source of pollution. But on the other hand, sometimes you have to do that, and that's it's hard to really stop doing. So the two approaches, as I was just saying, one is mitigation and the other one is adaptation. So I'm going to talk a little bit about things that we can do that are ways of changing what's going on if you feel strongly enough about it and think that should be done. The other one is that we all know that we've got to, if we know what's happening, we see what's going on around here, and what can you do to try to adapt? So, of course, there are books written on both. So the adaptation is the process of adjusting to actual and expected climate and its impact. And I'm going to give you some specifics on that. And we'll start with one adaptation is to just try to figure out ways of reducing water consumption, even if you're getting a lot of water in the spring or something like that. A lot of people have come to really believe in the idea of having a rain barrel, because we know that I personally know as a gardener that I'll get a lot of rain in a month, and then the next month I'll get no rain at all, and it drives you crazy. But you're busy watering and doing all kinds of things. One of the other strategies for not having enough rain is to use sprinkler systems. There's certainly good ways to water and not so good ways to water in general, but a sprinkler system, if you have.
But that's, those are soaker hoses. Sprinkler systems.
I'm sorry, I misspoke. I meant soaker hoses.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, so some kind of a soaker which is the more effective way of watering than to get out a faucet, a hose, and just water. The other thing is also to be careful to water at certain times of the day. A lot of this is good gardening practices. Watering, the best time is in the morning, and second best time is in the evening. You don't want to water during the warmer weather.
You have to watch if you water in the evening, you don't get root rot.
Right. There are all kinds of problems that are created from watering in the evening. The other thing is to diversify your plant selection, to try new varieties, looking for plants that tolerate heat and drought. When you read the seed packages, and we see which ones are the better ones for tolerating heat and drought, and certain ones that actually are better for that kind of thing. I've been growing more and more leafy plants rather than, think about it, the plants that you might like a nice tomato, and we definitely do that, but even certain tomatoes are better for tolerating the heat or the drought. And
Can I add something about that? Since you
Please
brought up tomatoes. I wasn't going to do this, but you mentioned tomatoes. About 4 years ago, we had an epidemic of blight on tomatoes in this area. People just couldn't grow them. They just kept getting blighted. And I found out that what had happened is a type of tomato plant that had been distributed by one of our local big, home improvement places. brought a variety of tomato to this area that when it had any of this blight, and the plant was then put in compost at the end of the season or not destroyed somehow, the blight, our winters had gotten warm enough that they weren't cold enough to kill this bacteria that carried the blight.
Hmm.
So people were putting the plants in their compost. They were, just not containing it the way it needed to be contained. And so the blight went crazy for a few years.
Wow.
Now, I think maybe more pesticides or, herbicides got used. Eventually it died down, but we still have early and late blight as a problem here. People don't talk about that.
No.
It's like, I don't know why that isn't very, very much a top priority for learning about gardening in this area.
Well, I mean, I have a compost pile, and a lot of people do have compost piles, as you kind of alluded to. And the important thing is that there are certain things that you don't want to ever put into a compost pile, even if even a decent tomato plant. You never know whether there's going to be some of the diseases in it. So the better thing is there's certain things that you can put in it, and certain ones you need to be careful about.
There's one thing that I learned over the years that works rather than poisons or whatever.
Mhm.
And that is to, the white garden cloth that's very thin. When you plant your tomatoes, I started them by seed, but as soon as I would put them in, I put my cages, various cages, and then I cover the whole thing with that white cloth, right down to the soil. And that way, when the breezes started blowing the
spores don't come.
spores,
Yeah.
And that's how I got my tomatoes to grow before, anyway, that's just one way.
Yeah.
But they're in the air, and
Right.
they're just gonna affect anybody who has their tomato plants uncovered.
Sure. Interesting. Right, as I said, a lot of it is all about good gardening practices, and because we're getting so many variances in the weather conditions, we need to start thinking about these. And the other thing is, we do need to cautiously shift the planting times that we plant. I've been finding, every spring, I watch the weather forecast much more carefully than I used to, because if you have an opportunity to plant earlier, it makes some sense, and it definitely did work this year to plant a little bit earlier. If you remember, it was warm, that there were like a period of a few weeks when it didn't look like there was any chance that there was going to be a frost, but you got to be careful. And there's another thing that happens in terms of the adaptation, is that we do need to look out for some weeds that we never used to have to deal with that are affecting our planting constantly. I can remember a certain number of summers where the pests were more of a problem than in other ones, because of, when we had a terrible drought, the groundhogs were looking for food where they didn't normally need to look for food. And so I've had problems with groundhogs at times in years when I never used to. And it's true of all kinds of other pests that we may see that we would not normally see. And of course, kind of as was mentioned, we do need to worry about certain diseases that we would not normally have seen. And this is actually from a quote from Time magazine. It does mean that the pest pressure and the pathogens are going to be more invasive, more involved with the garden. You got to be prepared for too much water, and what you're going to do to prevent that. It's talked about the rain barrels, but also obviously it doesn't always look like this, but it certainly we can get some pretty difficult situations with the amount of water. And so what can you do, or how do you know? First of all, these are just some of the things that you need to look for. The lower leaves are turning yellow. Plants are getting wilted or rotting. no new growth on the young leaves because of the too much water, and the soil just appears green. I work on a food pantry garden with some people, and I'm always reminding them that you really don't need to water when we've been getting a lot of rain during certain weeks in the summer. So we have to be careful that it's just not like don't automatically water your plants. And then there's the problem of too little water, which we certainly have faced in certain times, in different months. And you need to know about when to water plants. We talked about watering in the morning if you can. We find that deep, infrequent waterings are much better, especially if there's too little water, and the drip irrigation. Okay. Now, so that was all adaptation, and now we're moving into ways that we can take actions that might reduce the sources of greenhouse gas emissions. For example, I mean, some of these things, it seems like this was, we created this probably a good 5 or 6 years ago, and it seems like we're not even having to worry about this as much, because just about anybody who's putting in a fixture will put in LEDs, or at least in compact fluorescents, because they're also less expensive, but they definitely use a lot less energy. So it's one way that we can be using less electricity. The idea of using an electric lawnmower, I'd actually have an electric lawnmower, and it's terrific, it's amazing. And but trying to move towards electric powered and non gas using appliances makes a lot of sense. One thing that's kind of interesting is that a gas lawnmower for an hour uses as much, I'm trying to figure out how to turn this off for seconds so I can read this, uses as much gasoline, or pollutes as much as 10 to 12 hours of driving a car, because there aren't the same regulations on it. So when we looked at that slide that showed the carbon dioxide and showed the percentage it's transportation, well, the burning of gasoline is even more of the gas lawnmower. Again, if you can do something about that. And planting native plants rather than invasive non-natives makes a lot of sense, partly because of the native plants are so much more friendly towards our gardens and towards the insects. The insects are attracted much more to native plants than they are to non-natives, where they just don't know what to do with it. I've seen it in my own yard when I plant native plants, and how much more they swarm around a native, like a New England aster or obedient plants or so many others. Another thing you talked about composting, and just having a compost container on your counter so you can put that in, because you're not going to have the same problem. Again, certain things should not go into the compost container, but I have a compost pile in my backyard, and I use that for fertilizing my plants. And the tree giveaways, at certain times of the year, there are some very nice tree giveaways. I have a few trees that I planted in my yard that were given away for free on Arbor Days. And if every one of the 85 million households in the United States planted one tree, they would absorb 2 million tons of carbon dioxide. So trees really do work as far as absorbing the carbon dioxide, because as we know, they take in the carbon dioxide. There are ways that you can actually, it's nice that something like the National Wildlife Federation actually has a way that you can make your own yard a wildlife habitat by having certain things in it. And everything in there makes a lot of sense in terms of creating a whole ecological system in your own backyard, and that's also ways that we're going to help to alleviate some of the problems when everybody tries to do it, or more people try to do it. Another good idea for gardening that is not only good gardening practice, but also is going to help to mitigate the issues that we talked about is planting cover crops. There's a lot of different crops that you can plant. This is a little bit late at this point in the season to be thinking about that, but maybe something for next year. In the, when a part of your yard becomes or like if you're doing vegetable gardening, when you're done with the vegetable gardening, to put down a cover crop, it's going to be better for the soil, and it also again is one more way that we can convert some of those gases, like the nitrogen gas, into soil nitrogen, which is going to be better for the yards.
Why is it too late to do it now? I thought you could do it.
It's, I'm not saying it's too late for everything. It's too late for a lot of things, for certain things. Yeah, there's no question there are certain cover crops that grow pretty nicely. I mean, look at the way the weather is right now. So I didn't mean to imply that it's too late for it, but it's later than, say, if you thought about doing it in August and September. Each cover crop, and Rodale has a nice example of all different kinds of cover crops that can be used. So it's something we can think about. And just your being here is an example of how you're really doing your part in a way. Thinking about gardening and growing your own food rather than doing all of your purchasing and eating of vegetables, and when it gets on a truck and gets driven from California or something like that. So there's a lot that we can all do that, and also, I mean, we know that it also makes some sense to eat and consume vegetables in season. They taste so much better. Were you going to say something, or? And lawn fertilizing is also something that creates problems, but you can use slow release fertilizer instead of fertilizing as much as some people feel that they need to, in order to, and also thinking about converting to parts of your lawn to put in other different flowers and different perennials, especially. Sir.
Nitrogen is also, it's not just the gas, it's the runoff that goes into the lakes, rivers, ponds. We have a home in Florida also, here. And they have all of these algae tides and everything else.
Right.
And it's all from nitrogen.
Mm.
And actually what they're doing is some of the springs and rivers that go out into the Gulf of Mexico where the manatees hang out, they can't hang out anymore because of all the algae from nitrogen. Because everybody's lawn has to be thicker and greener than the neighbors, and it's ridiculous.
Yeah, it is, and that's a problem. It's a huge problem. Yeah. Thanks for that. But as we like to say, there's only so much. I mean, I've given you so many examples of things that we could do as individuals. There's no question that something needs to be done by our different localities, different forms of government that we have. There's so much more that can be done for this, and it seems kind of overwhelming, but it does make sense to communicate your concerns to your representatives and government officials about the needs.
That's a real conservative way of looking at it. Right now, the government officials who are taking money from the petroleum industry are making things so much worse for us.
Mm.
I mean, that's all part of what's connected here.
Right,
I
absolutely.
mean, you said not one person can do so much, but look at that young girl from, what's her name? Everybody knows her name.
Greta Thunberg, yeah,
Right,
she's
and-
unbelievable.
The thing is, like, what you're talking about with lawns.
Yeah.
There was a campaign in California to make people get rid of their lawns, put in rock gardens, put in meadows, and there's no emphasis on that in this area.
Right.
The lawns are just, they're like monsters.
Yeah.
They're filled with poisons. They're not good for children, animals, and then people mow them like crazy.
Yeah,
It's-
constantly, yeah,
A campaign just for that
Yeah.
in this area would be phenomenal.
right,
you know?
right.
And lead to other people raising consciousness.
Absolutely, that's so important to have that super perfect green lawn. And, I apologize if I'm stepping on anybody's toes, but this is another aspect of mitigation that you can certainly think about and try to do something about it. And again, it's part of that whole simple things. This book was all about, climate diet, similar to the 50 Things books. But you can't do everything, but when you get a chance in the spring, when you're planting, you have an opportunity maybe to put in take a section of your lawn and put in a native plant instead of having it be green. And it does make it prettier in some ways. It's not all green. And then we talk about that it's like green deserts. So very well taken, very well put. So think about that. There we go. So these were just some of the, I did make up a short sheet of some of the resources, but I also find that it's almost impossible to do anything with resources because, we talked about that in the beginning with some of the graphs. You can find much more information, up-to-date information, I should say, online than you can in a lot of books because it's impossible to write a book that really is up to date in terms of what's going on. But some of the websites are pretty good for at least if you want to look up things on the subject. And one interesting thing is that the NASA site is one of the best in terms of giving you fact-based examples of what's going on with climate change. So it's just a
There's
few.
another good book on the environment, was written years ago by Dixie Lee Ray. She used to be the governor of the state of Washington.
Oh, right.
The name of the book is called The Environment, Whatever Happened to Common Sense.
The environment, whatever happened to common sense.
Very good book. In it, that's where I have my thing about the
The volcanoes.
volcanoes.
Uh-huh.
She makes the comparison that we as the human race, mankind, or a little copper BB, that's us in pollution.
Uh-huh.
One volcano is a railroad boxcar.
Hmm.
Put that BB in the boxcar and then look for it. See
Yeah.
if you can find it.
No, I'm not buying that.
So, any other comments or questions? All right.
I have a question.
Yes.
What would you say if we were to take on any one practice that would be the most helpful? What would it be? In gardening, of course.
I think the comment that was made about trying to convert your lawn, because that is something that, I used to have an all green lawn, which is, the house that I bought had that, and for a long time I thought that made sense. And I think you can gradually start to replace parts of it, no matter what, you have to take into account all the things like how much sun you're getting in certain parts of it. But there's just a host of fantastic native plants that can be put in. You get the pollinators when you put in a native plant. You eliminate having to mow the lawn in, you know, in the spring, it's like, twice a week or so, or something like that. And it does add beauty in a way, so you don't feel bad about it, and it's just like constant, you know, sort of chipping away at that lawn. So you have a little bit less lawn mowing to do, and you've got something else that is good. So that's my opinion. But,
If
go
you
ahead.
don't poison your lawn in the spring, you get to eat lots of wonderful dandelions.
Yeah.
And
it's
even
true.
the flowers are good for
Yeah.
stuff.
Oh.
And I discovered when I was pulling out a weed that I didn't know, lots of this particular weed. And then a friend of mine who knows botany came and told me that what I was pulling out was wild spinach. So then I just started eating the wild spinach. It's better for you than cultivated spinach.
Right.
And it grows like crazy, and
Huh.
it grows almost into trees.
Wow.
And it's right there,
Yeah.
comes up all by itself.
Yeah.
There's a lot of foraging that we can do if we leave alone
Right.
things. Amazing amounts of food that we can,
Yeah.
that are
Sure.
provided for us just from what grows from this native area.
That makes sense.
So I sent my husband an article this morning about not mulching and not raking and just leaving. What are your thoughts on just leaving for the fall?
Oh, leaving the leaves.
Leaving leaves, at least some of them.
Yeah.
It's like you're gonna kill it off.
That's my husband's argument, and mine
Because, I
is
mean,
keep
I
the
can't-
micro.
Like, I can't see the grass in my backyard. It's all gone, because there's leaves over 100%.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, and
So
then-
what are your thoughts on the leaving of the leaves as opposed to the mulching of the
Yeah,
leaves?
I think, yeah, you are gonna kill the grass or hurt the grass if you just leave them. Plus, there are other problems that you create by leaving the leaves and mold that it creates.
There's a way to deal with that too.
Uh-huh.
I'm really sorry that I'm talking too much.
No, you've got great things to say.
Well, I just moved from a place I lived for 25 years where I had a garden as big as this room and chickens. And I just moved to Limestone, and I'm in a very bad place in my mind because I've lost someone. I had rain barrels, I had drip irrigation, someone. I also had fences that kept out any groundhogs. Okay, I'm gonna shut up about that right now. The acre I was on, which I rented for 25 years, and then he died, her daughter sold it, so that's why I'm here. Anyway, there were maple trees all over the acre, and so the leaves, were amazing. But one thing I discovered was that if I would mow the leaves, they would crumble enough so that they wouldn't suffocate the grass.
Right.
But the other thing is that you don't even have to mow. Just get your little leaf blower out, which is electric, and you take off the bag, and it just crumbles all the leaves.
Yeah.
Enormously. And then the other thing is that those leaves, if you've got too much natural nitrogen in your soil, if you put bags of those leaves on your garden, that will help. One thing I learned was one year I had lots of leafy stuff and not a lot of the fruit, yeah. And the leafiness was great, and that was great for leafy food I was making. But if you add your leaves, assuming it's not black walnut trees, of course, it'll balance out your soil. Just those leaves that you've sucked off of your lawn.
Right. Yeah, no,
That's my only problem. I have a couple of black walnuts.
Oh, that's too bad. I'm so sorry.
yeah,
Squirrels love them.
yeah, they sure do. Yeah.
And they make good ink. Toxic, but they make
Yeah,
good
I
ink.
believe it.
Yeah, no, I do this, I rake up my leaves and I put them in a pile, and then I use the electric lawnmower to grind them down, and then I can put them in, and then I can make a compost pile from them, use them for mulch or compost. But it's true also that if you mow over the leaves, you're creating mulch for the lawn, as well as if you rake them up and put them in one spot, you can use them for your gardening. So there's just a ton of things that we can be doing. Any other questions, comments?
I think a segment you might want to consider adding to your talk.
Sure, thank you.
is
Appreciate it.
Replacing, we talked about replacing your lawn with perennial cover, like maybe Pakistan is not the best example. But yeah, that's the idea, right?
Yeah.
Right, I think is probably better for this area.
Yeah, no, I thought about I should probably take a photo of my own lawn just to show how and I wish I had it before and after because
You know,
it's been over the years.
Fertilizer runoff is probably one of the biggest things that
Oh, yeah.
the
Yeah.
homeowner can control.
Right,
to a
right.
certain extent.
So you're saying add a segment more about how we can replace lawns gradually.
Sections of lawn.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of the name of this, and I can't think of it, but I thought it was a weed. And it grows low to the ground, it's got little tiny leaves on it, and you think of it as a weed. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? Because it's an
I have to see it.
it's a native to this area. And it's, I gotta find out.
It's like a zucchini. Right?
No,
Some of that
No,
in
that's
my
not
lawn.
it. But I discovered that it's edible and it's a great, it's also a great cover, instead of grass.
It works as a ground cover. Yeah,
Yeah.
right. That ground covers. I mean, that's what I was talking about with not only the ground covers are definitely make so much more sense than your typical lawn because they don't need to be constantly cut and yet they look good.
And they
Yeah.
don't need fertilizer.
Yeah, right. No, right. Especially if they're native. So it's terrific that way. No, thanks. I appreciate it.
Fertilizing isn't bad as long as you don't use all the commercial from Scott's, whoever else makes it. Use natural. There's enough dairy farms around here. There's horses, they have
Oh,
rabbits,
Don't talk about
chickens.
dairy farms. I was surrounded by dairy farms.
But
They use,
I don't care what they use on the
Roundup.
dairy farm, it's better than Scott's in the bag.
yes, except that they're buying it from Scott. They're buying thousands of dollars of poison for their fields. I know, I was surrounded by them, and I went into their farms and I saw these huge barrels of poisons. Don't drink the milk from our dairy farms. It's so full of horrible stuff. Trust me, I lived there for 25 years, surrounded by some wonderful farmers whose fathers and grandfathers bought seeds once and then could reuse their seeds. Now the farmers can't do that. That's why they're going out of business.
Wow.
They get their seeds from Monsanto. The seeds have systemic pesticides in them. The systemic pesticides kill our bees. I mean, dairy farms are not the place to get anything, trust me. There are lots of ways to get natural fertilizer.
But there are.
We've had a comment online about.
Yeah, I was
I'm
just
sorry to
I
interrupt, but
wanted to make sure that these
we've had a
people did.
comment online about the plant that you were talking about, edible purslane.
Yeah.
Oh, that's another one. That's
Yeah.
really quite good. But there's
Okay.
also
Any
another-
other comments from the online people? Because I didn't want to slight them.
No questions.
Okay.
A comment from Janet, if you want to help plant trees at Baltimore Woods this Saturday,
Oh,
you can contact hgcny.org. And also they are going to have a presentation on jumping worms at
Baltimore
Liverpool
Woods?
Library on Sunday,
Oh, at Baltimore Woods.
at Liverpool Library
At
on
Liverpool
Sunday.
Library, I'm sorry.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then they have a newsletter, info@hgcny.org for habitat gardening in Central New York. Yes, so.
It's terrific. All right.
Well,
So I
Yes,
have a
sir.
master gardening question. So what is the knowledge level one should possess if they're interested in master gardener? Should you, the master term is a little intimidating. Should you come in?
It really is, yeah, no, I can say that, there is an application process. And they expect that you're a gardener, or you've tried gardening in some way or another. But on the other hand, they do teach a lot about a lot of the basics. And as I kind of implied or said, I don't remember, you learn so much once you become a master gardener and you're working with people who know just a little bit more than you or know a little bit more about a certain thing. I mean, I was pretty much only a vegetable gardener when I became a master gardener, when I joined it. And gradually, I started to realize that it made some sense to, it was funny because my wife would always do she would be in charge of the flowers and everything else like that. And as we learned so much about native plants, we put more and more in, and it's been kind of exciting to see them work. And also, we always love seeing the butterflies flocking to them and everything like that, which is kind of an added bonus.
We've had another comment online from Victoria. I recommend supporting organic farmers if you're able to when buying food. We strive to do our work in harmony with nature. I believe Victoria is an organic farmer, a local organic farmer.
That makes a lot of sense. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's the price that the little bit more that you're gonna spend on organic fruits and vegetables is supportive of the environment.
And small business, local.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks. Well, thanks so much,
Thank you
everybody,
so much for
on
coming.
this beautiful day, and thank you out there in Zoom land.